What if you could duplicate yourself, not just how you look and sound, but how you speak to the world? I trained an AI to do exactly that. In this video, I'm going to show you side by side what the difference is between a generic AI output and your personalized tone of voice output. So what I've done is I've done that to myself. I've analyzed the way I speak, the way I write, and my tone of voice and my style, using ChatGPT. And I've created a GPT that talks and thinks and writes exactly like me. So I can then feed it anything I want and output something that is 80% of the way there in terms of what or how I would actually say something or write something. And the way I've done that is by giving it samples of my written work. So I've stuck with writing for now because I write a newsletter and it's quite easy for me to give it content based on that newsletter. But you can also do this for anything that is or just audio. So you could just give it loads of podcasts, for instance, and have it pick out the tone of voice and the style that you use. And for me, this was a really exciting thing to be able to do because as a languages student, I mean, my first language was Turkish, then English, then I learned French and German. And it was always fascinating for me to understand how languages put together and what we actually do when we talk and how we speak. So when I discovered this this analysis very recently, I was quite excited, to be honest, to understand like how do we break down language and how can the AI replicate how I speak or how I write. I'm going to show you what that looks like today. Okay, let me walk you through a couple of examples. So we're using ChatGPT 4.5 for this, and I've asked it the very simple question, what are the benefits of having an AI use your tone of voice? Now, as you can see, its output is pretty standard and generic. So it says consistency in communication, it's a couple of bullet points, enhanced personalization, a couple of bullets, improve customer engagement, time and efficiency, strengthen trust and authenticity, brand differentiation, scalability, reduced errors. So, you know, all very useful and informative things to say. It's a great answer, but it's very generic. So what I would like to see now is the difference of when I've asked it the exact same question, but using the GPT that I created for myself. So for the version of the answer that is specific to how I would write or speak, I've given the GPT a 9-page document that is my tone of voice analysis. And this looks at things like my vocabulary and word choice, whether I use any slang or colloquialisms, what kind of words or distinct words that I usually use, my grammatical patterns. I've looked at verb tense and consistency. I've looked at grammatical deviations, my punctuation. You know, I've looked at so many different things, like unusual or idiosyncratic patterns. What else? Complexity of sentence structure. I've looked at blah 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 fragments, run-ons and very beginnings in my sentences, my preference for short versus long sentences, sentence length. You know, I've looked at so many different elements of how I write and how I speak, so it's really given quite an in-depth view of it. And if I wanted to get a really in-depth view and get from 80% right to 100% or nearing 100% right in my tone of voice, I would have probably given it a specific prompt for each of these sections of analysis of what I'm looking for. In this particular instance, I used 3 different prompts to create this analysis document, but perhaps instead I would have used, you know, sort of 10 or 11 prompts, for instance. So this is the input that has gone into coming up with an answer that will hopefully be more on point. So let me show you that now. Okay, so I've used exactly the same question. So what are the benefits of having an AI use your tone of voice? And it's written it in a much more much friendlier, much more casual way, which is very similar to the way I write my newsletter and the book that I'm writing at the moment. So, authenticity at scale. You don't have to choose between growing and sounding like yourself. That does sound like something I would say. Eliminate, simplify, and automate is something I say all the time, just in general. But I mention it quite a lot in my book, which is one of the inputs that I gave it for the manuscript, is one of the inputs I gave it for this exercise. Efficiency without compromise just doesn't sound right. I mean, does sound like what I would say. What else? Being 15 was hard work. Yes, or who admits they once performed Britney's hits in the mirror? Unfortunately, that was me. Yes, guilty. Creative focus. I mean, there's obviously less points because I usually use less. Like I always try to stick with sort of 3 to 7 bullet points when I write, because I don't think the mind can hold more than 7. Whereas if you look back to the original generic response, there was something like 10 or 11 bullet points in that. So from that perspective, it's also copying the way that I would write in terms of sentence and paragraph length, and just general, my general view of how writing should be and how I would want to write. So would I say it's 100%? No, I wouldn't. But as mentioned before, I think that if you want to get to 100%, you have to spend a bit more time crafting the prompt, and actually each prompt would be just a very specific part of the analysis that you're trying to look at. Now imagine using this across your business, thought leadership posts, social media posts, newsletters, sales pages, client comms, all of it unmistakably in your voice. This isn't about replacing people, it's about scaling your message, with clarity, consistency, and power. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this or you found it interesting, please drop me a comment or a like and subscribe to my channel and let me know what you thought of it. And I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.